Welcome to Question Time. Tonight we are in Birmingham. On the panel we have George Eustice, Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and MP since 2010. He previously stood as a UKIP candidate in the European elections. Labour's Shadow Secretary for Child Poverty, previously Shadow Schools Minister and a former President of the National Union of Students. Wedge Streeting. Karen Billamoria, founder and chairman of Cobra Beer, crossbench peer, president of the Confederation of British Industry and Chancellor of Birmingham University, just down the road from here. Ella Whelan, columnist at the online magazine Spite and co-convener of the Free Speech Battle of Ideas Festival. And influencer, former air cabin crew and contestant on ITV's Love Island, Amy Hart. Good evening. Welcome to my panel. Welcome to the audience here in Birmingham. Very good to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home. Do join in the conversation the usual way on social media at BBC Question Time. And let's hear what you've got to say. OK, our first question tonight is from Alexa Basked.
Is the petrol shortage, as a result of a lorry driver shortage, just the beginning of the problems we are going to face post-Brexit? And could this have been mitigated?
Post-Brexit, could this have been mitigated? Where's Streeting?
Yes, bluntly. There are a whole range of challenges that arise out of the government's botched Brexit deal. Problems that weren't just foreseeable, but foreseen. We were warned about shortages of labour, writ large with HGV drivers. And there are steps that the government can and should have done to overcome them. Of course, we should be upskilling our own people to make sure they've got access to good jobs in industries like haulage. And with the skill shortage we've got, the government has a migration advisory committee that is there to help advise to have things like temporary work visas to get people over to keep the petrol pumps moving. And if a government can't get things as basically right as keeping fuel in the pumps, no wonder people think they're so incompetent. And just this week, George Eustice blamed the voters, blamed the public for the petrol pump crisis, saying it's because people are going to the pumps to buy the petrol. Well, of course they are, because the moment this government says nothing to worry about, there's no crisis, everything's going to be OK, you know that that's obviously not going to be true. So the government, it was the worst of both worlds. They failed to take the preemptive action and then they fuelled the panic instead of fuelling the motorists. And it's a total disgrace. And, George, you really should apologise, not just to the audience, but to the public at large for blaming them for your government's incompetence.
Do you want to apologise?
Well, no, the fact of the matter is here that as we've come out of the pandemic right around the world, there is actually quite a bit of turbulence in supply chains. We've seen disruption to shipping. Yes, we've seen some labour shortages in some sectors. And we've seen other issues such as a big surge in demand for gas, particularly in Asia. And that's caused some issues there. But look, when it comes to HGV drivers specifically, this has been brewing for a while. And what actually happened is that a lot of people during lockdown, many of these HGV drivers, they're in their 50s, and many of them actually decided that having been in lockdown, spent more time with their family, it's not a life they wanted to return to. And so rather than thinking immigration is the answer to everything, and it's only actually a small number of HGV drivers that are EU citizens, what we really need to be doing is trying to improve working conditions, see wages rise for those on lower pay, see HGV drivers' wages rise, and actually do more to improve, infrastructure on our roads so that
But George, you
showers.
said on Tuesday none of this is because you left the European Union. There is an HGV driver shortage across the European Union, but nowhere in the European Union is seeing petrol shortages.
No.
And Northern Ireland, for example, is not seeing petrol shortages. And they say we have a shortage of drivers, but we've easy access to supply chains and recruitment for the Republic of Ireland.
Well,
but you're still saying it's nothing to do with Brexit.
No, so there are about 400,000 HGV drivers short across the EU, particularly acute in some other countries. I think Poland's got a shortage of about 100,000.
Shortages as we are?
Well, it comes back
on the shelves.
Wes being very opportunistic and saying I'm blaming consumers. What I actually did earlier this week is just point out that there was a surge in demand for petrol of about 50% over the weekend. And that's why we started to see petrol stations run empty. Now, that started to calm down since then. And actually, over the last 2 days, for the first time, more petrol's been delivered to our forecourts than sold through the forecourts. And the number of petrol stations actually running out has fallen significantly since Sunday. So this is an improving situation.
Well, it's the same today as yesterday.
But the shortages that we've seen over the last 5 days have been because we've experienced a panic buying episode, and we saw this during the pandemic as well. And when you get a surge in demand of that sort, you just can't keep up with it, and that's why we need people to return to normal buying behaviour.
There are lots of hands up. Lots of hands up. Let me come around. This the lady here in the front with a head scarf on.
Fiona, my husband is a HGV driver. There's 400,000 short HGV drivers in Europe. There's 100,000 of them in this country. The other 300,000 is spread between 27 other countries, so the impact isn't as big. In my job, we depend on a supply chain from the Far East. Both our jobs are impacted by the incredibly hard, stupid, short-sighted Brexit that this government insisted upon. And we're only at the very beginning of it.
OK, the woman here in the glasses.
I don't really understand what he's talking about, saying that this is coming towards an end. Coming to work today, every single station I passed said that there was no fuel. So I don't quite understand where they're saying that the government's sorting this crisis. It feels like it's just going on.
The man in the blue sweater.
It clearly has got something to do with Brexit, the shortages, and the token of 3-month visas for people to come from the continent to help us out. It's not going to happen. They're not going to come from the continent because we made them feel so uncomfortable with Brexit.
So, I'll come to you. I just want to... Karen, the question is this just the beginning of the problems we're going to face post-Brexit? I mean, I'm just asking you in terms of your, obviously, the Confederation British Industry, but also as boss of Cobra Beer. How is that affecting you?
I was driving back from Birmingham, from here, day before yesterday to London, getting into London about midnight and seeing these queues and queues of cars. And I felt physically sick. Here we are, the 6th largest country in the world, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and we have to have that situation. I think it was completely avoidable. I look back to Hansard in June in the House of Lords. I challenged the government. I said, what are you going to do about the shortage of labour, including of lorry drivers? There is a huge shortage, 100,000 shortage. And they said, no, you skill them over here. We're not. I said, open up the immigration emergency list. The deal we have with the points-based immigration system after leaving Europe, the EU, is that if there is a shortage in any sector, you listen to organisations like the Migration Advisory Committee, and then you're allowed to bring in the workforce that you need. Now, how much more desperate can it get than this? And the government wouldn't listen. We said in the CBI as well, a speech in CBI in June, months ago. And then now the government says, OK, we'll open up the the emergency list. And it's for 3 months. And wait for this, Christmas Eve. 3 months. Now, if you want to attract, there's a shortage in Europe, if you want to attract lorry drivers to come here, one, the conditions, they have a horribly hard job. We've got to improve the conditions for them. We've got to give them an attractive enough pay, but you've also given them some certainty of a much longer period than 3 months. So this is the thing I found about the government. They've been brilliant at helping business throughout this pandemic. £400 billion worth of support, the job retention scheme. But quite often with the CBI, we've said, look, we spot the problem, here's a solution, and the government doesn't immediately listen, they eventually listen. They could have listened earlier.
Ella.
It's hard to take seriously the fact that so many people who have been anti-Brexit from the start kind of like rubbing their hands together now and saying, haha, we told you so. And there's a difference between the people that voted for Brexit and the reasons that they did so on a democratic basis and the screw-ups of a Conservative government. But there's also, in relation to HGV drivers, I think everyone's sort of scratching their heads thinking, how can we fix it? I mean, Karen mentioned it. Driving a lorry, my friend did it for years, is often a miserable job. The conditions are horrendous. The pay is low. I mean, and we've just gone through a pandemic in which the government shut down society. And so there's like tens of thousands of applications sitting on the DVLA's desk. That's not just because they've been sitting on their hands in the office, but because we've had the closure of offices and we've had the stoppage of society. And then what does the Labour Party and others come up with and say, oh, we need emergency visas. So this is what we're saying to immigrants. Come over for 3 months, all you Eastern Europeans, help fix our problem, and then sod off again. I mean, that's not what I want to see in relation to a conversation about immigration, an instrumental use of our fellow Europeans as a means of simply seeing them as people who do jobs for us. That's not a good way of looking at citizenship. It's a very simple problem. you know, the issue with shortages, particularly in HGV drivers, predated the pandemic. In fact, it predated Brexit. This is a long-standing problem.
But we didn't see shortages on shelves then.
But the fact is, the quality of that job and the quality of a worker and the pay they get and the conditions. I mean, you know, people are having to sleep in their cabs and then stop on the side of the road to take a leak. It's not, you know, I wouldn't want to do that job. Would you want to do that job and be paid peanuts? It's like, there is a very simple answer to this, is which you make the job attractive to everyone and you don't use immigrants in this very instrumental way that sounds a little bit like the kind of people on the far right that Labour's often criticising.
The man in the yellow tie.
Grant Shapps said on Monday that one of the solutions to this is bringing troops in to deliver fuel to our tanks. He then admitted that was the 18th strategy that they thought about since the spring. If in my job I'd put 17 strategies in place and they hadn't worked, 6 months later, I'd probably be out on my ear. Is Mr Shapps culpable, and should he fall on his sword?
OK, let's hear a bit more. The lady in the pink top.
You talk about the conditions that these people have to work in. By bringing people here for 3 months, what value are we giving to them? What message are we as a country giving to them? And what will happen after 3 months? Yeah. We'll be back to the same situation? Or will suddenly more people appear?
Well, that was what I was going to say. What are we going to do in 3 months' time? If I woke up tomorrow morning and decided that my life's work was now to be an HGV driver, am I going to be ready to drive a petrol tanker in 12 weeks' time? I'm not. Also, like you said, we want to attract these people, so we need to give them 6 month, a year visas to let them find somewhere to live, let them have some sort of structure, plan their lives in advance. It's not fair to, like you say, invite them over and then send them away after 3 months and then probably 2 weeks later say, actually, no, but here's another 3 month visa, we need you back again. Sorry that you've dropped all your life again. Come back again. It's just, you can't treat people that way.
And also, the gentleman there spoke about the army. You know, we've got 54,000 tests, HGV tests pending. Now, we need to process that quickly. Why don't we get the army? Yes, they're helping out with the drivers. They helped out with the Olympics, if you remember. Do you remember the last minute the army came in? Our armed forces are the best in the world. They're brilliant. They come to the rescue. Now they can come to the rescue and getting rid of this backlog of the HGV tests. And that's another solution to the problem.
So last week we had Grant Shapps on here, since you mentioned it, saying we were talking about HGV drivers in particular, and he said he wouldn't commit to additional visas. He said, if I thought it would help, we would do it. The question is whether it would make any difference by Christmas. He obviously wasn't convinced. Later that evening, it was briefed that actually this is what was going to be happening. Hearing what you've heard here from the audience now, do you think it will make a difference by Christmas? We're hearing all sorts of warnings from Next, from Bernard Matthews saying they're not sure they're going to have enough turkeys at Christmas. Do you think this is going to solve the problem?
Yes, it'll make a difference. And just to come back on a few things, the gentleman who said that there are 18 strategies, I think the point that Grant would have been making is there are around 18 different measures that they brought in place. And that included, for instance, extending the expiry dates of the renewal licences for drivers so that they wouldn't lose their licence due to the backlog. They've changed some of the testing so that they can increase the capacity by about 50,000 a year. We have brought in the MOD to help speed up that testing to clear the backlog. All of that work is going on. But specifically on the visas, the real reason that we are bringing in these short-term visas is that in the 2 weeks running up to Christmas, there's typically a 50% increase in demand for fresh produce and fresh meats in particular. And supermarkets won't order food that they think would be perishable. And so making sure that we've got that additional driver capacity for that short term, and these supermarkets would bring on temporary drivers to boost their delivery capacity, typically during that Christmas surge anyway. Making sure they've got access to that labour, yes, will make a difference. Bringing in the additional 5,500 seasonal workers, specifically to work on the turkey sector, again, which is very condensed into about 4 weeks, yes, that will make a difference. And these have always been seasonal jobs. Are these things
going to solve the problem as far as you're concerned? Are they going to save Christmas, basically?
They're going to make sure that we've got the capacity in our HGV fleet, particularly on the food sector.
That's not what I'm asking. Are we all going to see as much on the shelves at Christmas as we would normally?
Yes, we believe. We've been working very closely with the supermarkets on this. And although it's undoubtedly the case that there is a shortage of labour right through the economy at the moment. Typically, most businesses carrying vacancies of around 12 to 14%. That's a fairly typical figure. Now, although we've got those shortages, they are managing to keep their output going. And provided we can get sufficient HGV capacity and bring in the seasonal labour that we need for sectors like turkeys, then yes, we will get the food to the supermarkets for Christmas.
The man in the back, in the check shirt. Oh, in the green sweater, sorry.
Yeah, for those of us that voted to remain but respect the result of the referendum, if this is just the start of the impact of Brexit, I wonder if George could give us, enlighten us on the positives that we can expect going forward.
All right, before, I'm just going to get a few more points. Yes, the man in the check shirt.
Basically, my opinion is I believe the immigration policy set by the Conservative parties is way too extreme and way too harsh. You've got a very hostile immigration policy. Things like the 18,600 marriage threshold, right through to, you know, this issue with the petrol issue. You need to. My question to the Conservative minister would be just show a bit of compassion, and relax the immigration rules a bit more. Just show a bit of compassion for immigration, so that it could help get overseas workers to come over here and to sort out this problem out with the petrol issue.
I mean, it's interesting because more people in our audience voted for Brexit than didn't, and what we're getting is from the people I'm seeing their hands up, there's a lot of criticism of what's happening. Is there anyone here who thinks this is kind of what we expected and it's a bump in the road? But yes, you've kept your hand there at the back with the glasses.
Hello, yes. I just wanted to, it's not really about Brexit, I just wanted to say, why don't we have any sustainable models? Obviously we can't keep food on the shelves, we can't seem to keep the petrol delivered. Could we not look at rail freight? Could we not look at shorter supply chains? I mean, it's, the model just isn't sustainable.
Okay. Well, I've done a shout out. I'm not getting anything back, so I'm going to move on. Let me tell you, before I do, where we are going to be next week. We will be in Aldershot with Lisa Nandy from Labour and also the comedian Rosie Jones. And the following week, we will be in Nottingham. It's great having real audiences here, as you can see. So we'd love you to be part of it. So if you live in or near Aldershot or Nottingham, do apply to be in the programme. We'd love to have you. You can do that by going to the Question Time website and you can follow the link there. And hopefully we will see you next week or the week after. Right, let's take another question, which is from Jyoti Saini. Jyoti.
In the light of recent events, as a woman, how can any female trust the police?
Now, Jyoti, since you've asked this, and this is obviously in the light of the just appalling murder of Sarah Everard, and we know now that the police officer who killed her is serving a life sentence and will never be released from prison. What's your answer to that question?
I think any woman going out alone, just going about her business, should feel safe. For what that man did, it's just chilling, isn't it? To think about using that warrant card or whatever he used, whatever system he had in his mind to obviously lure her, was a real breach of what his, what a police, the police should do.
So do you feel, the answer to your question, do you feel that you can trust the police? If you were on a road and a police officer approached you during an evening, it was dark, say, would you feel you could trust that officer?
No, I don't feel I could.
OK. Ella?
There's some serious questions to be answered and asked about Cousins. I mean, when he joined the police force, there was an incident that wasn't looked into in relation to violent pornography. He got the nickname Rapey or Rapist Wayne. He exposed himself, allegedly, twice, once, in fact, I think, less than a week before he committed the murder.
So the two allegations, one in 2015, which was not followed up.
Yeah.
And then 3 days before Sarah was murdered.
Yeah, so this individual clearly either slipped through nets or people turned a blind eye to what he was doing and his pattern of behaviour. So, no, that definitely dents the confidence of the police. But look at what's happening. I mean, just in, I think it was today or yesterday, Kate Wilson, who is an environmentalist activist, won a tribunal saying that the police officer who was undercover, who had had multiple relationships, one with her, had violated her human rights. You know, Labour Party was told to abstain on the Spy Cops bill. I mean, there is real questions as to how police officers use their authority. There's a real spinning today of the idea that, and actually quite perversely, often by lots of contemporary feminists, that we need police officers to, for example, watch over our shoulder in case someone says something misogynistic to us in relation to making misogyny a hate crime, that we need protection, when in fact the people that are supposed to be protecting us, it seems like we can't trust. I think on a broader issue in relation to the fallout from what happened to Sarah Everard, what happened to Sabina Nessa, there is a discussion now. You raised the question about women being afraid. And it seems to me that there is a tendency to exaggerate the fear that women should feel. And that's not kind of doing down the seriousness of what happened to these women. But it's to say that when men commit these acts, which are really about making women afraid, making women feel vulnerable, it's not, you know, about necessarily just about sexual perversions. It's about making women feel like second-class citizens. If we are then going to say that either that police officers tell us that we have to wear longer skirts or carry rape alarms, or indeed that contemporary feminists tell us that we need to go around feeling afraid all the time, and that, as Sadiq Khan said, there's an epidemic of violence against women, well, that's denting women's freedom just as much. We need to recapture the spirit.
It's not just Sadiq Khan, it's Vera Baird has also said there's an epidemic of violence.
Yeah, if you look at the details of where violence happens against women, it is predominantly in a majority in terms of domestic abuse, in terms of what happens to women in home by people that they know. The act of a stranger grabbing you or kidnapping you off the street is so minimal in terms of the level of violence that happens against women. And yet, why is it that we all look over our shoulder? Why is it that we all clutch our keys? Why is it that we're all afraid? I think we need to recapture the spirit of the women's liberation movements of the 70s and 80s that called for the reclaiming of the streets, that said that women aren't going to be afraid anymore.
OK. So the question is from Jyoti. As a woman, how can any female trust the police, Wes?
I hope Cressida Dick is listening to your question. I hope the Home Secretary has listened to what you've said too, because today there's been lots of sorrow and lots of empathising, but I think people are looking for action at this stage, not words. And what Ella described doesn't just speak to the appalling, evil nature of this man, but a culture in policing that lets things go that should not be acceptable in any workplace, let alone a workplace that is supposed to be upholding not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. Now, I know that what this man did has caused shockwaves throughout policing. My stepfather's a former police officer. My sister, one of my sisters, is a former special constable. Most people who go into policing do so because they want to uphold the law, to ensure justice, to keep us safe, and they put themselves in harm's way when they do so. So let's not pretend that every police officer is complicit in this culture, but when the independent inspectorate of the constabulary says that every police force up and down the land is not giving violence against women and girls the priority it deserves, we need more action. And the other thing I'd just say is on sentencing. When this man was given a custodial sentence for the rest of his life, it was rightly pointed out in the media that this is a rare sentence. Anyone, whether they are a police officer or not, who abducts, rapes and murders a woman should never see the light of freedom again, should spend the rest of their lives in prison.
Yes, sir.
Interesting point you're making there. It's been a very sad day, really, generally for society. This situation has come about because the police have got away with so much over the years. This isn't one crime. That policeman could have committed other crimes and been covered up for it. To have a nickname called rapist in your workplace, as a policeman, I couldn't have that nickname, and I teach. So why is a policeman having that nickname? Other policemen know what's going on, but covered it up.
Woman here in the glasses.
If Cressida Dick had any sense of respect for the Everard family, she should resign immediately. Simple as that. The buck stops with her. That's it.
Man here in front of the blue shirt.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in terms of police and police numbers, obviously we've got a drive to get, I think it's 20,000 police by 2023. Out of that, I think only 750 have been employed in the West Midlands. Where are they? Are they at the desks? Where are they? You know, women walking alone, you mentioned earlier. You know, women walking alone, if they're approached by a male officer, they shouldn't be approached by a male officer. They should be approached by a male and a female officer. But we can't because there aren't enough police officers.
I'm here with the glasses.
I remember how the policing was a long way back, because I'm old, but...
Not a bit of it.
It is a lot better now. The police are much more approachable now. I myself will not be scared of policemen. I will accept being approached by a male policeman, because I think that 99% of them are good and have gone into policing for the correct reason. And they are there to protect us, and I'm quite happy to deal with them.
Amy.
I agree. From when you're a child, you're taught, you know, if you ever lose your mum, like, look for a policeman, look for a policeman. And I think 99% of them are good. You can't tar them all with the same brush, but maybe we do need more things in place, more psychological tests before you're allowed to be a policeman, maybe going round in twos so you know that when you see two together that it is legitimate. But, I mean, we've all done it. Reading Sarah's mum and dad's statement, it really hits home when I get back to the station at night and there's no taxis around and I think it's literally a 7-minute walk back to my house. It is a 7-minute walk and I could be safe, but reading Sarah's mum and dad's statement, that could be any of our parents. And it makes you think, actually, should I be walking home at night? And I know we shouldn't be scared, but at the end of the day...
But, see, it's a tricky point to make, but, you know, if these individuals like Wayne Couzens and the people who assault and attack women and murder women and rape women, what they're doing is they have a sense that women are, they use the term second-class citizens. You know, they think we're weak, they think we're less valued than them, they think they can assault us and put us down. And if we maintain that sense of women as constantly as weaker and vulnerable and more in need of protection from police officers or from regulations in the workplace or from any of these kind of safety measures that contemporary seems so hell-bent on implementing these days, then what we're doing is perpetuating that old sexist idea that women need to be looked after. It's a tragedy. It's a heinous fact that when we're walking home, we feel afraid. When in fact, actually, the danger of us being abducted in the way that Sarah Everard was is very little. Why is that? We have to ask why the question women are going around feeling afraid. Because if women are going around feeling afraid and not feeling like they own the streets and not feeling like they don't need a chaperone or a police officer, I don't want to be approached by police officers, actually. I'm not that comfortable with police officers. Unless I've robbed a bank, leave me alone.
But Ella, isn't the point, I think there are a lot of feminists who might disagree with the idea that they are promulgating the notion that women should be fearful all the time and not go out on the streets freely. I mean, I think there are a lot of feminists who would not take that view.
In the wake of Sarah Everard's murder, there was calls for a curfew.
Is the issue perhaps that even though you're much more likely to be killed on the street as a man, and it is very rare for women to be killed by a stranger, on the very rare occasion it happens, the results are so catastrophic?
Yeah, but what are the solutions that we've heard? We've heard for an increase in sex education, as if an individual like Wayne Couzens, all he needed was a consent class. You know, all he needed was to know a little bit more about how to have a good relationship with a woman. He did the acts that he did in direct defiance of what he knew to be right and wrong. He knew what he was doing was wrong. That's really weak. There's also now suggestions of, linking in things like making misogyny a hate crime, which is essentially saying that women need to have police officers watching them in case someone says something dodgy to them. Regulations in the workplace I've already mentioned, and also the idea that floated in the wake of Sarah Everard's murder of there being curfews on men that some baroness suggested in a half-jokey way, but was then taken up as a clarion call as a solution. I mean, none of that is actually addressing the question of what is going on with women's freedom. How free do women feel to walk around, to live their lives like men? And if we're suggesting that we need extra protective measures, then we are not equal to men. We are not free. We are not living our lives without someone watching over us. There is a similarity between a potential rapist or attacker watching over you and, a police officer or a chaperone. Leave us alone and let us live our lives.
Woman with the glasses.
I don't think women will ever feel safe walking alone, whether it's even if it's walking alone in the street or if it's in a nightclub or anywhere. I think it won't be my generation that will feel safe on the street. It might be the next generation. But I think it will take a long time to actually allow women to feel safe.
Karen.
And I feel so terrible hearing that. I'm a father of 2 daughters, and reading the statements by Sarah Everard's parents and her sister was just heartbreaking. And my great-grandfather was a police officer in India. My great-uncle was a commissioner of police in Mumbai. Police officers, on the whole, are really good, committed people. And there is a lot to be answered for here with Wayne Couzens. Why? As I said, there's a lot the police has to answer for. But the big issue here, I think, is the number one responsibility of a government is the security of its citizens. And look at the police force. They've made the right decision. The gentleman in the blue shirt there said 20,000 extra police officers. That's absolutely the right thing to do. Just think about it. When did you last see a police officer on the beat? When did you last see those neighborhood police officers who used to cycle around? It's that deterrence. It gives you that sense of feeling of safety. And they get information from the public as well. We need police officers back on the street. And we also need armed police officers. Look at the terrorist attacks. The number of armed police officers we have now is not much higher than we had during the 1970s and 80s, during the times of the trouble. Invest in the police force. Give us that sense of safety. Let's see them on the streets again. And then we will feel more safe.
George.
This is a shocking and incredibly distressing case, I know, for everyone, and a real tragedy. But I think we always have to bear in mind that there are police officers up and down the country who feel exactly the same and will be absolutely, utterly ashamed of what one of their fellow officers did. And it's really important, I think, that we challenge ourselves not to allow the actions of one bad apple, one individual, to tarnish our police force, which, by and large, has got very high standards and works very hard to keep us all safe.
Can I just tell you some comments that a former chief superintendent in the Met, who served 30 years, made to the BBC Today? And she said, the police service is very sexist and misogynistic. She herself experienced something that should have been reported. She said, I dealt with it myself. On one occasion, I did report it, and I was vilified. What happens is the male police officers close ranks. And the fear most women police officers have got is that when you're calling for help, when you press that emergency button on your radio, they're not going to turn up.
Well, look, I don't know about the individual points that she's referring to, but clearly in this individual case, there were some failings that the police themselves will acknowledge, and they're obviously going to look very closely at the conduct of Wayne Couzens and how that got to that sort of point. But I think there's a wider issue here as well, which is how do we try and address this problem of domestic violence against women and girls generally. The Home Secretary actually, in response to this case, started off a whole piece of work around a new strategy on violence against women and girls. So looking at making our streets safer, looking at designing out some of the risks, getting more CCTV, supporting more helplines. We've had a domestic abuse bill, which has given new powers to the police to intervene earlier in a more proactive way and to protect witnesses from being intimidated by their abusers in court. So there's quite a lot of work that we've been doing in this agenda since the summer. But I don't doubt that it's quite sad to hear the young lady in the audience who said that she doesn't feel that she'll be safe in her lifetime. That isn't good enough, and that's why we've got to keep doing more on this agenda.
The man in the blue sweater.
So much of the discourse around terrible cases like this seems to focus on victims and women and changing their behaviour in order to avoid being attacked or murdered, whether that's by a policeman or by any man. Where's the accountability on men, the pressure on men to just stop doing it in the first place? It just doesn't seem to be there to the same extent as the focus on altering victims or potential victims' behaviour.
Woman with the glasses.
So I agree that we shouldn't let one bad apple ruin the bunch, but if I'd eaten a bad apple, I'd probably be put off having one for a while. I mean, I would never have thought twice about a police officer coming up to me. Now, I often finish late at night. Would I trust them?
Would you?
Probably not.
OK, I'm going to take another question from Amelia Jones. Oh, Amelia, that's you, is it? Right.
Should we be ending the charitable status of private schools? And is £1.7 billion enough to level up education in this country?
George.
I don't think we should change the charitable status of private schools. There's been quite a lot of changes made over the years. Many of these schools now do, a lot of work to offer, people free entry to them and partner with other schools. They do a lot of charitable work along the way, so I don't think it's appropriate to change that charitable status.
Amy.
So,
private schools?
Personal choice would not be my personal choice for my children. I think it's scandalous how unfair it makes the playing field. I actually hosted a Q&A with Keir Starmer on Saturday, and there was this amazing young guy who got up to chat, and he was saying that he started his own charity called the Open Private School when he found out that 7% of the UK are privately educated, and they have 39% of the high-ranking jobs. So it's like a pay-to-play situation. I don't think where you're from should determine
well,
where
I think
you end
that's
up.
6.5% of all school children in the UK attend private school. That's the stat. So you say you were having this Q&A with Keir Starmer because you were at the Labour Party conference.
Yes.
Obviously, this was one of a number of pledges he made in his speech. This was his big speech to the conference, but also to the nation, whereas, of course, you were there. How did it strike you? Were you impressed by what you heard or not?
I am. I think taking away the charitable status will get that extra money that we can really plough into state schools. State schools should be as good as private schools. There should be a fair playing field, and you shouldn't, like I say, where you start shouldn't determine where you end up. If you want a high-ranking job, you shouldn't have to think, well, I didn't go to a private school, so now the odds are stacked against me.
And hearing Keir Starmer's speech, did you look at him and think, there's a future leader?
I did, and obviously I got to spend quite a lot of time with him. He is such a genuine guy. He's so passionate about change, and I really think he will be a fantastic leader.
Anna.
Well, you can ask questions about how to fund schools, about the funding of private schools, and Amy makes great points about the fact that it's an unfair playing field. But you have to also look at the other side of talking about education, which is what is the quality of education at our schools, which isn't just a financial issue. I mean, listening to, I take a slightly different view of Keir Starmer, because listening to his speech at the Labour Party conference, he went on about the importance of education as a stepping stone into jobs and about how kids need to have opportunities, yes. And then he took the mick out of, right, maybe rightly so, took the mick out of Boris Johnson and the Conservative government about reintroducing Latin in this kind of really sneery, poo-poo way, at the same time as suggesting that we have to get serious about the humanities. There's a real instrumental way of looking at education at the moment, and particularly not just with primary school and secondary schools, but also when we get into higher education. We've lost what the sense of what education is about, what it is meant to be for. It's not just meant to be about preparing kids for the labour market or opening up their job opportunities. It's about instilling knowledge in a new generation to make them be the innovators of tomorrow, to get them to be interested in taking Latin if they want, to be interested in niche things, whether it be quantum physics or English literature, as I
So,
was.
to that end, should the charitable status of private schools be taken away?
I don't really care, to be honest. I don't think it's the central issue. I think that if you had a plan as to how to benefit state schools, and particular, not just in terms of funding, but also, raised at the Labour Party conference, I keep going on about it because it's what's happened this week, is you have the unions talking about the fact that Ofsted is a real problem in blocking. The fact that teachers have to spend 80% of their time ticking boxes and only 20% of the time actually engaging with kids. This is not just a financial issue. It's also a case of what is the quality of teaching going on, how free are teachers to be able to command their classrooms, to be able to impart knowledge onto the new generation. It seems to me that's a much more pressing issue.
OK, the man at the back now.
Yeah, well, just kind of building on what's just been said, isn't part of the issue the fact that within state schools, the sole determinant is how well they're doing the league tables, how well they're doing exams, whereas in private schools have a much more rounded approach to developing the person, not just the education or the knowledge of that person, and maybe we can learn something from that ethos.
Okay, the man in the yellow tie.
I'm a current head teacher.
So let's hear what you've got to say on this
I worked in
subject, then.
Birmingham for 23 years.
A
in
head
the inner
teacher of a
city.
state or a private school?
It's a state school, it's maintained, it's an academy, it's in Shropshire, it's in rural England, which gets less funding than big city and urban centres, which needs to be addressed. But I'm shocked at what I'm hearing. The quality of teaching is poor, children have got no aspirations, what a load of rubbish. The quality of teaching that I see every day in our school is wonderful. And in schools, we are switching on light bulbs, and kids have got fantastic opportunities and chances, but those opportunities do get stopped because of where they come from, and it has to stop. You know, they did a research yesterday about the last MPs and Prime Ministers. 39 came from Eton. How many came from little old Lake and Charles School in Shropshire?
It's 20 actually for Prime Ministers, but that's still a lot, I grant you.
It's still an awful lot, but
yes.
none have come from state schools in Shropshire, and I think it's an absolute crime that we put children down all the time, and actually in schools, we are spending all our time building children up, and your teachers are passionate about your children. And as long as that continues, our young children have got a really good chance, as long as they don't get stopped from getting those top jobs because of where they come from.
And do you think the charitable status of private schools should be stripped, as Labour is suggesting?
I think leave private schools alone. If 6% of the population want to send their kids to private school, let them send them to private school. You can't buy a really good education because it's out there in the state sector being delivered on a daily basis. If we could just get on with education instead of having to administer tests for the NHS are wonderful, and the rundown so teachers
You're talking
can
about the COVID test?
COVID tests,
Right.
and we can do vaccinations. You know, I spend more time at the moment working for the NHS than I do for the DfE. And that's ridiculous, and it has to stop. And we've got to be left to get on with educating our young people.
Just out of interest, who went to private school on this panel?
I did. Both.
You did.
I've been private and state, both.
OK. You wanted to come in,
I was going to say, I think you're making an absolutely spot-on point here, which is we've got some fantastic schools in the state sector. And I actually think the changes made over the last decade to try and allow head teachers to be, captains of their own ship. I think with the Academies programme, all of that's changed. I've got some fantastic schools in my own constituency. They're inspirational. The way they really help challenge and stretch those who want to move on and do more and go to university has been phenomenal. And our teachers do some excellent work day in, day out in these schools. As for the COVID rules that you've had to do, look, this has affected all schools. But that is obviously now starting to end as we come out, thankfully, out of this pandemic.
The man in the blue sweater at the back. Yes, you.
Hi. Yes, I've been lucky enough to have been educated in state and private schools, and I think there is a place for both. And they're just increasing the quality of the state schools. That bad, as Darren said, there are some good state schools and some bad ones. The worst performing ones do need to be improved, levelled up. But getting rid of the charitable status of private schools, I don't think it's the right thing to do. But I think using the good parts of the private school and the resources they have to link up possibly with state schools in their area, that's
I think that would be a good suggestion.
A way of levelling up.
OK, so far we've heard that it's either irrelevant or actually it should be maintained.
Few things in life are as powerful as a great state education. And in my case, it enabled a boy from a council estate in Stepney to become the first person from his family to graduate from university, Cambridge University, and to go from where I grew up to where I am now, being sat on this platform talking to you. There are very, very few things as powerful as that. Like, there are few more powerful routes out of poverty. But the truth is, after 11 years of this lot in government, we've got school funding on course to be lower in real terms now than it was when Labour left office. The gap in attainment between those from the wealthiest and poorest backgrounds is widening. And when it comes to the wider opportunities that parents make big financial sacrifices to send their kids to private school for things like learning to play an instrument, taking part in drama, theatre, competitive sport, those opportunities are declining for kids from ordinary and poor backgrounds. Music, sport, drama, participation in each of them has declined over the last 11 years, and it shouldn't be like this. I want to make private schools redundant by making state education so great that people won't have to make financial sacrifices to send their kids to private.
Why don't you get rid of private schools? I mean, in 2019, Labour voted for that at conference and then slightly bottled it, if you like, and didn't go for it. Isn't that really what you'd like to do? We just haven't quite got the political will to take it through.
I don't think we want to be authoritarian and shut things down. But all I will say is that great state education doesn't come cheap either. And one of the things that Keir Starmer, our leader, and Rachel Reeves, our Shadow Chancellor, made clear this week is that we're not going to go into the next general election with a whole wish list of promises that look and sound too good to be true. We have to show the public and earn your trust that we can be trusted not just to deliver great public services, but to tax fairly and spend wisely. And it's got to be paid for. And we think that giving tax breaks to private schools, making sure they can't pay VAT, for example. I mean, private education, whatever you think of it, is definitely a luxury good as far as I'm concerned. And the money has to come from somewhere. And this government is clobbering people on lower middle incomes to pay for everything. That's why national insurance is going up by 10% in April.
And do you think the 1.7 billion that you'll recoup from the schools, do you think the 1.7 billion you'll recoup will make much of a difference?
It's a start. Of course, we're going to set out our tax and spending plans in detail ahead of the next election so people can see transparently. But it's about fairness in tax, it's about spending wisely, and let me tell you, a great state education with all of the opportunities available to kids in private school would be the best investment for the future that money can buy, and that's why we're prioritising education as we have.
Karen is desperate to come in. What do you want to say?
I went to both private and state schools, and it's less than 7% are private schools. Remember, everyone who goes to private school is freeing up that funding for somebody else who's going to state school. But the disparity, Wes has got a very important point. Last year, I spoke at the conference for the 150th anniversary of state schools. Now, how many people know that it's only 150 years that state school education, that right to education, it started at a very young age. It was 14 years old. Then 16 years old. Only recently was it a right to go up to 18 years old, and the right to education is a human right. The oldest private school was founded in the 6th century. So there's been this huge inequality for years.
And Karen, this is very interesting, but the question is, should we be ending the charitable status of private schools?
But the point is that the disparity, if you go on the extreme, a border will pay £50,000, and the funding for a private school student is £5,000. And I think that the private schools should be there. They're some of the best in the world. They bring in international students as well. And I think both. The main thing is to improve. The gentleman over here is absolutely right. The best state schools, providing the best education to give the chances to what you experience, Wes, that's brilliant. And one point I do want to pick up on, and that is the testing. Mass testing was not implemented, and we had 1 million of our children isolating because of the bubble system. An Oxford University test has proven that if we'd had mass testing, they wouldn't have had to isolate. The same result, less than 2% were positive. Why didn't we listen to that? That isolation was completely wasted, and our children's school time was wasted. It was completely avoidable.
Lots of hands up. Let's come to the man in the glasses at the back.
Thanks. I agree that the state school, because I went to state school, I think state school needs to come in par with private school. But is there something there with organisations, businesses need to do more? Because if there was no demand for bias in the recruitment process, whether you came from a private school or not, it wouldn't really matter. If there's no demand, you wouldn't need to be looking at state or private school, and people have an equal place to be able to get the right top jobs.
Okay, the man here in the blue shirt.
I totally agree with what Wes has said, and I just wanted to add that private school or state school, because of the incompetence of the current government, lorry drivers are going to get £80,000, which is as much as a doctor or nurse nowadays. So how do we correct that?
So hang on a minute, where does that leave us in terms of should private schools lose their charitable status?
I think they should be left alone. It doesn't matter. Like Ella said, I couldn't care less.
All right. The woman here in the middle with the grey sweater.
I think fundamentally, I think a few people have touched on it about inequality, where we're asking the wrong question. The fact that, by 5 years old, you can pretty much tell the chances of a child, that's actually disgusting. So what are we doing to address early years education, early years support, and obviously the secondary and primary school kind of elements of it are important, but there's something fundamentally going wrong between the ages of kind of 0 and 5.
Okay, and the man here in the white shirt. Yeah.
I would agree in that sense that we might be asking the wrong question. If you have a two-tiered education system, you might just end up with a two-tiered society. You know, the answer to this has been figured out in countries such as Scandinavia, or some countries in Scandinavia, where they've done away with this two-tiered education system. I find for the people who have the means to send their kids to those public schools, if they now had to send those kids to state schools, I would assume the quality of those state schools would rise quite naturally.
So you'd rather get rid of private schools altogether?
Yes, I would, personally.
Okay. And the woman here in the headscarf.
Mr. Hughes, I don't know if you have children, but if you do have children, did you educate them in the excellent state schools you spoke of, or did they have a private education?
Well, I have a young child who's not yet at school age, but is at a Montessori class.
And are you intending to send your? I mean, I get too personal here, but since you've asked, are you intending to send your child to a private school or a state school?
No, not initially. But look, I think
so to a
like
state
anyone,
school.
to a state school, yes, for private school. But you know, like anyone, I think people make the choices based on what's right for the individual child. I think the lady there
also assuming they can afford it.
And can afford it, exactly. You know, that's of course another factor. The lady that made the point about the early years, I think is absolutely right as well. You know, life chances are often shaped quite sort of irreversibly in the sort of first 3 to 4 years of a child's life. So making sure we've got those sorts of support in place, and that's why we've increased early years support for parents to make sure that we get that bit right as well.
Ella, you wanted to come in.
Over the last 18 months, we've had a test of how important education is. And I completely echo your points about teachers being... I'm not trying to slag off teachers. I mean, teachers have had to work incredibly hard over the pandemic, harder than they ever had to try and keep kids at a certain level. But we've seen a government that's thrown education under the bus. I mean, the fact of the closure of schools, the continual disruption within schools, whether it's bubbling, whether it's, as you said, teachers having to now, you know, make kids gag with the stick and testing them and then sending them home and spending all their time calling up parents and this and that, and no time in the classroom. I mean, the fact that we've seen talk about inequality, how many kids in this country have access to, you know, if you've got 3 kids, 3 computers, enough broadband, enough time with their parents who are working to be able to help them at school? The government and indeed the Labour Party in its failure to challenge them have thrown kids under the bus over the last 18 months. The kids have been out of school and we'll feel that knock-on effects in the years to come. So the question is, does this government and indeed the opposition party actually value education enough when it comes to a test like what we've been through in the last 18 months?
Okay, woman in the grey top.
In regards to throwing students and particularly children under the bus, I've been at university for the last 2.5 years now. And
how has that been for you in the last year?
It's been very, very difficult and kind of comes on to my next point about national insurance and also student loans. In the last week, there's been talk in the press about lowering the student loan repayment threshold, which not only provides a challenging point for us once we graduate in terms of whether we actually repay it or whether we end up, you know, getting older and then not repaying it. But how is that fair for people at the lowest parts of society that will then have to repay this loan earlier on, which then means they'll have less income to put towards things like starting a family and earning and having a mortgage?
Man in the green sweater.
Yeah, I think Keir Starmer's point was well made in his speech, actually, about the Latin thing. I mean, we've had 18 months of shambolic treatment of secondary schools by this government during the pandemic. And in terms of levelling up, the only thing we've seen so far is Latin. And this opportunity to make a structural difference by taking away the charitable status of independent schools is rejected. And so what else have you got, apart from Latin in the curriculum?
Okay, one last point quickly from the lady in the pink top.
Children and inequalities and the difference between private and state schools. If we don't invest in any of these children, whether it be private or state, then what will we have in the future? What will this country have? Because they are our next generation of people who will be going out to work.
OK. I've got one more question, which we wanted to fit in. There are a few people talking about this. Oh, Darren, are you Darren? Right, the head teacher. Maybe you're thinking of the kids with this question. Go on, let's hear it.
No Time to Die premiered this week, signalling the retirement of Daniel Craig as 007. which politician would make a great James Bond and who would be an ideal Bond villain?
Now, I want all of you to think as well, because I might be coming to you. Come on, Wes. A great James... Yes, a great James Bond and an ideal Bond villain.
Well, look, it's been Labour Party conference this week, and I've seen in Keir Starmer the steely qualities needed for the next 007, and as a loyal member of his shadow cabinet,
hang on,
expect me to come out with that cringeworthy line.
And the villain?
I mean, as for Bond villains, I mean, there's no shortage. I mean, George, you wouldn't make a bad Bond villain, actually, but no, there's a whole there's a whole cast of potential Bond villains. I do actually. Priti Patel, I think, would revel in the Bond villain.
Oh my goodness! Okay. It's so funny. So as soon as you asked, I could see all the panel thinking, "God, what am I going to say? What am I going to say?" Ella, quick, have you thought of someone?
I don't know. It's funny actually. I've always had. It's not just because I disagree with his politics. I've always had a different view of Keir with the slick back hair and the kind of slightly constipated look. That he could be a good Bond villain in that odd way. But, you know, the interesting thing in relation to Bond is the whole question that the leader of the opposition has made is whether the next Bond is going to be male or female. Having not been a big Bond fan myself, I have to say I don't particularly care either way. But the question of villains in politics, I think, often gets thrown around, whether they're trivial villains or whether they're serious villains, and it's a little bit of a superficial question.
Right. Well, that's a bit harsh. I mean, a superficial question list. We're almost out. We thought we'd have at least a moment of levity, Ella. Amy, Bond or a Bond villain?
I can't decide between David Miliband or Andy Burnham for my Bond.
Right, your Bond, OK.
Because they're both a bit dishy.
Bit dishy,
yeah.
right, OK.
And,
if they're watching, I'm sure they'll be very grateful.
And my Bond villain, I think Priti Patel, in, like, the spinny chair with the cat.
Oh, my goodness, right, OK. George?
Well, this is obviously going to go down party lines, isn't it? So,
really? Surprising.
I think, actually, Jeremy Corbyn, since he's now out of the Labour Party, would probably make a good Bond villain, not a James Bond. And I think I'd say Rishi Sunak could be a good new 007.
Karen?
Oh, well, the Bond villain, without a question, Donald Trump.
Right, OK. Taking it abroad,
world.
right. And what about a Bond?
Well, many choices for Bond, including Boris Bond.
Oh, no.
Right.
Come on.
There's quite a few hands up. I can't wait to see what you're going to say. Yes.
I don't know who'd make a good Bond or a Bond villain, but I think Boris Johnson would make an excellent Q.
Excellent Q, all righty. The woman in the glasses.
Bond villain, Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, man in the check shirt.
How about a Bond girl? Angela, Miss Scum.
Angela Rayner. Right, OK. Man in the pink shirt there with the glasses.
Matt Hancock's not too busy. Maybe he could be a villain for next year.
I think we've left that kind of James Bond behind in previous decades.
Right.
We want to return to that.
Man in the blue sweater.
I think we could just choose any member of the Tory party as the villain, couldn't we?
Oh, OK. Guy in the blue sweater.
Yeah, going back to the education theme and his success of the vaccine rollout, Nadim Zahawi as a James Bond and perhaps his predecessor, Gavin Williamson, as the villain.
Right, OK. Do you know, questions like that, sometimes people can just not think of anything, or you get an extraordinary reaction like we have just had. OK, that's it. Bond and everything else is over. Our hour is up. Thank you very much to the panel for coming along this evening. Thank you to all of you for coming along and being part of Question Time. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching from Question Time. Bye-bye.